Welcome to Lunch with EFI. We have a little mix-up in our not a mix-up. What's the right way to say that? We've got a remix from recent episodes. We've got Jason today and Ian. So welcome, guys.
Thanks. Good to be back.
Yeah. Jason, it's been a few weeks.
I've been traveling and actually almost didn't make it back for this because my flight from Orlando last night was delayed due to thunderstorms, and so I ended up spending the night in Houston.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah.
Bummer. Well, we're glad you made it back okay, even if it was delayed. Yeah. And Ian has been homebound for a while, or close to it.
I haven't.
Good reason.
Very good reason.
Yeah, so the twins were born a month ago today, which is wonderful. So this is one of my outlets where I get to do something different for a little bit, and then I also joined a softball league. So I have that once a week. I went when the twins were 2 days old and they were still in the NICU. I was our first softball game. That was interesting to share with folks that I'm here despite having 2-day-old twins, but you have to have something. You love your kids, but you got to have something to keep yourself sane.
Yeah, little outlet. That's good.
Yeah,
that's very good. Okay, well, we're gonna get into the appetizer, and I am up first today for that. So my initial thought was we really should take a little bit of time and talk about Jimothy, but then and I'll tell you, while I was looking at this and looking for a photo of Jimothy, the famous raccoon from Seattle, I went to Google and I typed in Jimothy. Everyone should do this. So if you're watching, jump on Google real quick and type in Jimothy, and you'll see a cartoon Jimothy run across your screen, which is pretty cool. I thought it was funny. So good on Google for their humor there. But no, instead of talking about Jimothy, I really think we should talk about something a little more on topic for what we're doing here.
Or you've got to create some sort of metaphor that Jimothy is somehow it's related to the appetizer somehow.
I should. And there are plenty I can come up right off the cuff that they're, poor Jimothy, he's cute, but he's not exactly normal. And just like our elections. And so last night was primary election day in Arizona. And I think I don't know this, but I think it ought to be the case that everyone across the country should be looking at Arizona as a kind of, and I think they do largely, people that are interested in education policy and school choice generally are, they pay attention to what Arizona is doing. A lot of that, of course, flows out of the people that we elect to statewide races, positions, but also legislative races and so on and so on. So yesterday was the primary election where nominees are selected from each party by the voters. And we had our current superintendent of public instruction, Tom Horn, who was running for re-election, but had a challenger in our sitting state treasurer, Kimberly Yee, who has served in the legislature for in Arizona here in the past, was a fantastic champion for school choice, was involved in the ESA effort early on, and has a story even further back in her involvement in education policy. And so she has a good long history there. And as it stands now, and there are not 100% of the votes counted, but it's tracking like Kimberly Yee will get the nomination. That's what it's looking like. And barring some huge deviation from the pattern that has been shown so far, she'll get it. She will win the nomination for superintendent of public instruction in Arizona. There are other races, obviously governor. Andy Biggs won the primary nomination yesterday over a few different opponents. And then we have a bunch of legislators from different districts that I think will be obviously a bunch won re-election that have been champions for our cause. But then there were some newcomers that also won their races, and I think will be very helpful. And I'll just mention here my friend, and I know Jason, George Califf, I think will be a good pickup for us.
George has the potential to be, the biggest champion of school choice in the state legislature. So that's very encouraging. It's also encouraging just to see, generally speaking, how many pro school choice candidates won across the board. I'm looking through the results as they've come in, and it seems to me that so far every single candidate that has won in the primary is somebody who is pro school choice, even in races like, and I'm not saying that this is the deciding factor at all, but take the Secretary of State race. You had Alex Colladin, who has been in the state legislature and has been a very strong vote on school choice, facing off against Gina Swoboda, who notoriously, as the head of the Republican Party in Arizona, was an ESA skeptic, to say the least. And I distinctly remember her going on a radio program, going toe-to-toe with Jenny Clark, and let's just say not covering herself in glory. Jenny is, probably the most knowledgeable person in the state about how, school choice programs operate. And Gina couldn't actually answer anything that Jenny was saying. And so she would just scoff and roll her eyes and say, you repeat talking points like, we need guardrails. Like, okay, but what do you mean specifically by that? Right. Nothing. Right. So it's encouraging to see that a school choice champion like Alexander Colladin won in that race. Again, not a huge, issue for the Secretary of State per se. But, even another race, Warren Peterson beating Rodney Glassman. Warren Peterson has been a huge champion of school choice in the state legislature. So it's encouraging to see who is winning in a lot of these races.
Yeah, and I would say, if we just zoom out and look at all of them together, you gave some other great examples there. If we just look holistically, I would say on the whole, a pretty good day in Arizona for the primaries. And let's now hope they all win in general. But go ahead, Ian.
You're talking about the superintendent of public instruction. I mean, I suppose if there's one position that's most directly a referendum on, K-12 education policy specifically, it's probably that. So what was that race? What were Tom Horn, right? What were Tom Horn's positions versus the presumptive winner, for those uninitiated to Arizona politics?
I'll give my 2 cents, and then Jason, you can chime in if you want. But I think generally the feeling that people have gotten, and there's more to it than this, by the way, and some of it I'm not interested in sharing, but but I'll tell you that I think generally the feeling is that he was a little soft on his advocacy for ESAs, and that might be polite. I think that's a polite way to say that, but he wasn't a strong advocate, hasn't been a strong advocate for ESAs or ESA families. I don't know that, he hasn't done a lot of damage per se. It's not like he was a Kathy Hoffman that was actively gunning for the program and wanted to shut it down. That's not the case. But I think people just looked at that and other factors. I mean, the truth of the matter is that Tom is not a spring chicken. And I think people have seen that he's just slowed down, and that's, he can't control that. That's his age. And so I think people have seen that and then looked at the alternative in Kimberly. Very experienced, has proven over years and years now that she can win a race, even a statewide race, multiple times, and is a strong advocate for parents and for students. So I don't know if you have anything to add.
I would just say, look, I mean, both of them on paper are pro school choice. You know, so I think it's that alone is encouraging that the two major candidates in a race like that are both pro school choice. That being said, look, they were both in office at the same time, essentially running different parts of the ESA program, because a part of it is under the purview of the treasurer's office, and a part of it, most of it, is under the purview of the superintendent of public instruction. I've been a critic of Tom Horn in the past. That's not a secret. I think if you Google my name and his name, you'll see that there were periods of time where I was quite critical of the way that he was running the program. I will also say, to his credit, his office kept the door open even to critics of his, including myself.
Yeah.
Also, to his credit, the school choice movement locally gave him advice. This part's not to his credit. Gave him advice about how to manage the program that he did not take. There were some results that we predicted that came to fruition. So, for example, he had said we need eyeballs on every single expense. And we said that is not possible. And if you do that kind of thing, it's going to lead to a massive backlog. You're going to have people waiting weeks or even months for reimbursements, for approvals for ESA expenses, and it's going to make life miserable for the parents. He did not take our advice. He went that route. That's exactly what happened. People were sometimes waiting more than 3 months just to get like a textbook, which you can't start school at the end of August and then not get a textbook until the end of September or even October, right? I mean, this just doesn't make sense. So he did eventually change course and implement risk-based auditing, which is what we had advised. And he took a lot of heat from the other side for that. But by and large, he stayed the course. And, so there was definitely improvement in the way that he was running the program. But still, I think I did leave a bad taste in a lot of parents' mouths. To what extent that affected their votes in the primary, we'll never know. They don't do the sort of exit polling at this level that you'll get, for the president or for a senator or a governor. So I think, we'll never really know. But I think the main story is, both candidates, in order to be viable, needed to be pro ESA in the state of Arizona.
Yep.
And I don't see that changing anytime, unless there's a huge change to the ESA program, which, of course, our opponents are trying to make. There is, as we all know, as the regular listeners to this podcast know, there's a concerted effort to put on the ballot an initiative that would severely curtail the ESA program, that would kick tens of thousands of kids off the program, that would confiscate funds that parents had been saving, especially parents of students with special needs that are saving for more expensive therapies as their children grow, that would restrict how they can use their ESA, so on and so forth. And it's funny because one of the claims that they make is how much fraud there is in the program. Now, this isn't true. Horn's office did an audit and found a random audit and found 0.3% fraud or egregious spending. Okay. So this is one of the most accountable programs in the state, probably in the country. Nevertheless, the opponents are accusing it of having, high rates of fraud, which is a fraudulent claim in and of itself. To gather the signatures, they hired more than 75% of the signatures they gathered, even though they call it a local grassroots effort. More than 75% of the signatures that they gathered were paid petition circulators. And we have found, when I say we, really it's the Goldwater Institute that is leading this challenge. The Goldwater Institute found that tens of thousands of these signatures were gathered by convicted felons or people convicted of crimes such as fraud, forgery. So there's a lot of people convicted of welfare fraud, credit card forgery, identity theft. And then among the felons, you had manslaughter, attempted murder. Here, I've got a list.
Would it be fair to say that they're not sending their best?
Yeah, they're not sending their best. Kidnapping, human trafficking, the transportation of illegal aliens for profit, arson, stalking, burglary, carjacking, assault with a deadly weapon, selling or producing cocaine and methamphetamines, and even sexual abuse of a minor. And there are videos and images of several of these people, including ones that are not allowed to be near children, who are at, Save Our Schools or Protect Education Now events where children are there as they are gathering these signatures. So, yeah, that's interesting. There are also tens of thousands of signatures that were duplicates. You can only sign once. Some people were trying to vote early and often, it seems. There were also tens of thousands that were just not in compliance because they were listing fake addresses. I think somebody listed, I forget if it was Yankee Stadium or Met Stadium or some baseball stadium in another state, but people were giving false addresses, or they were giving an email address that didn't work, or just in other ways failed to properly fill out the paperwork that is required by law, and we have a strict compliance standard. So the Goldwater Institute says that even though the other side claims that they submitted about 415,000 signatures, and they need about I forget the exact number. Let me see. What was it, Matt? It was 266,000, I think. 256,000.
Yeah, that's right.
That well over 100,000 signatures actually are invalid, and that they do not, in fact, have enough signatures. So this is going to be adjudicated in the courts. I expect they're going to be moving with all deliberate speed, given that we're going to want to know whether this makes it to the ballot or not well before it's time to vote in November. But the Goldwater Institute has been very strong in the past on these issues, and their lawyers are not ones to mess with. So I'm feeling very confident right now. I'd much rather be in our shoes than their shoes.
So all of that, yes. And two things. One, you mentioned that several of these, and not just several, by the way, like there were many convicted felons who were collecting signatures for this ballot referral. And I was just looking, I was trying to find, I believe the reason that that's important, other than just that's interesting and maybe that's a problem, I believe that you're not eligible to collect signatures.
Oh yeah, so that is the issue, right? So if if a person was convicted of a felony in another state, they are not eligible. If they are convicted of 2 or more felonies in the state of Arizona, they are not eligible. If they have been convicted of 1 felony in Arizona and paid restitution, then they can get their civil rights restored. But a lot of these, they've got long lists of felonies that they've been convicted of, and
who
many of them from other states.
Who among us has not smuggled caravans across international borders?
Yes.
So harsh.
Right.
Well,
Right.
for money or not for money? For free? Yeah, no. So that's an important point, right? Because already it's like, really, a lot of felons were, but beyond that, no, it's also important because state statute says just that. So that was one thing. And then I'll just say that I don't know. I'm hesitating here if I should take pot shots at the doubters. Yes, I should. Okay. No, this is exactly right. I mean, this is exactly what we initially said. Look, they tripped over themselves so badly last time, so badly, and the alternative that you're proposing, which we never heard until it was well underway, and a competing ballot measure by AFC, like we have many examples of that never working. And so to me, this is just another, confirmation that, look, guys, there's actually some strategy that if we put our heads together, we could come up with a strategy that should work. Their track record, now it's only one, but track record of making this attempt previous to now was a dismal failure. They're bad at math, it turns out, and or they're liars, or both. And so anyway, I think, thank goodness, wonderful news, and thank you to Goldwater for leading this charge, and thank you to everyone that supported. And by the way, I'll just pitch for them. They need support. There's a lot of money and time and effort that goes into challenging these. As confident as we all are, and I'm with you, Jason, I am confident. It's going to take a lot of resources. So I'll just make that pitch for Goldwater. Jump over to their site and send them $5 or send them $50 or whatever you can, send their way. They have a lot of costs that are going to go into that. So I'm with you though, Jason.
And the lead plaintiff, of course, is our good friend Jenny Clark, whom we mentioned before, head of Love Your School, who was also heading up the Decline to Sign effort. I know that Greg Blackie is also on it, who works with the Arizona Free Enterprise Club. Julie Batt, who's, one of the original ESA moms. She's been involved in the program from the very outset and has been a very strong advocate. I have to admit, I don't know Shannon Joan Graff, who's one of the other plaintiffs as well. But these are people who have been deeply involved in the school choice movement for a long time, and I'm confident that we are going to win this.
Yeah,
I'm curious who made the discovery that there were all these felons participating in the campaign.
So I believe it's Goldwater, possibly with help from the Free Enterprise Club. They've had a lot to do with the ballot initiatives in the past. One of the major precedents is Musey versus Hobbs, and Musey, of course, Scott Musey is the head of the Free Enterprise Club, so they've been deeply involved in this. They were also involved in writing the strict compliance law. So
it's interesting because let's imagine that you were a journalist and you were interested in exposing scandal in K-12 education. Maybe that's the kind of thing that would be on your radar.
Yeah, don't hold your breath for our friend Craig Harris to pay this any attention whatsoever.
Yeah, zero, none. That's what we can expect out of him. Well, that's great news. And I appreciate you making that our main course.
Yeah, look, just because they have signatures doesn't mean that the signatures are legit. Likewise, and this is not a great transition, but likewise, just because a school is full of low-income students doesn't mean that the school is low income. As a matter of fact, we find that many of the poorest schools, in terms of the income of the parents, are the richest schools in terms of how much money that they are receiving from state, local, and federal sources. So, Ian, you've got some news on that.
I agree. Yeah, I think generally you're the master of transitions, but
I gave it my best shot. I'm tired.
Right. Maybe that was just the hand you were dealt. But yeah. So interesting report that was just released by Brookings, and making the waves across social media. Lots of chatter just within the ed policy space, confirming. Actually, what I guess didn't necessarily know, but suspected to be true, which is that there is an inverse relationship between school spending and the economic characteristics of the students in the school. In other words, the schools that serve the most disadvantaged students are actually spending the most. And the reason that I suspected this to be true is that obviously Title I represents a pretty substantial investment from the federal government for those disadvantaged schools, and that at this point, generally speaking, states have these progressive funding formulas that are very deliberate about injecting extra funds into those disadvantaged schools. So for those watching, we have the data here, but it's broken out by quintile, and it's really quite substantial. Numbers 1 through 4, you see that downward trend, but then it really recovers in that fifth, or I guess just to describe it, as you move from the richest and you get poorer, actually, spending does decrease a little bit. But then when you move to that 20% poorest, then it's higher than everyone. So, those are probably largely urban districts that are spending a lot. And, I suppose it probably flies in the face of conventional wisdom. I will say, like, when you talk to folks on the street and you mention, you work in education policy, I would say that's probably sort of the biggest myth that you encounter, right? If only, and then they name the disadvantaged district nearby. If only they had the resources that the advantaged district had, the outcomes would be different. And for those of us who have spent time studying and thinking on these issues, of course, we understand that there's effectively no connection between spending and outcomes, and understand that there are those progressive funding formulas that are injecting tons of money into those districts that are serving disadvantaged students. But I will say it's nice to have updated, concrete data, and I appreciate the fact that it's coming from Brookings, which is, which I would think of as a center-left think tank, and not one that's necessarily ideologically sympathetic to some of the policy recommendations that might arise out of these types of findings. But credit where it's due. This is in my mind good and important work.
I remember when Andrew Coulson was first making the claim that Washington schools, the late great Andrew Coulson, I should say, schools in Washington, D.C. were spending north of $25,000 per pupil. Now it's like north of 35, but he was saying it was north of 25, and people did not believe him because they said, well, you have to point to a government source, point to a legit source. And he said, look, here's the Census Bureau. The Census Bureau collects this data because they publish a figure. The schools, the local schools, just published a figure that was just operating expenditures, right? Very convenient, right? It's like, how much do you spend a month? Well, I'm not going to include my mortgage. I'm just going to tell you the rest. That, well, where's all the money going, right? Dave Ramsey's not going to let you get away with that. So, but they reported everything to the Census Bureau. The Census Bureau, unfortunately, put it in two different places. So you actually had to take the total spending and you had to take the number of students and you had to do simple division. And then he would say, look, they're spending 25,000. They're like, look, we didn't get into journalism to do math. Okay. Unless the department, I can't trust you to do. He said, look with your own eyes here. Look at this table. Look at this table. Take these two figures. It's very easy. People didn't want to believe it. And likewise, in this case, conservatives have actually been talking about it, and libertarians for a long time, that the public schools tend to have more money in low income areas than high income areas. What's been frustrating is that journalists until now, that the Brookings Institution has spoken ex cathedra. They would not listen to us when we would say this because the locals would lie. And they would say, they would always slice and dice the figures in such a way to exclude the money that they were getting, for Title I or other things like that. So they would, these huge pots of money they were getting, and they would say, well, look, the state only gives us this, right? Or locally, we're only raising this versus we raise a small amount locally versus, over in Scottsdale or wherever, they're raising a high amount locally. It's like, yeah, but you're getting actually more from the state and you're getting a lot more from the feds. they would always find ways to slice it, and then the reporters would believe the local schools, even though we could point to the sources. So yeah, credit to Brookings. Maybe finally reporters will start understanding the reality that low-income schools tend to be the highest income schools.
And
So
it's funny, I mean, or, appreciated really that Brookings actually even talks about this issue directly within the report of why some folks have reached different findings. And, just to get into that a little deeper, one is what you allude to. And I mean, this one to me is absolutely preposterous that, some of the more recent work does not include federal funds.
Yeah.
Which would be like saying, if you live in New Hampshire or Florida, you don't you take home your entire paycheck because there's no state income tax, right? Well, it turns out, there's a federal income tax. So you're just choosing what you're counting. So, this idea of omitting federal dollars is preposterous and dishonest. Just
and it turns out that is the biggest chunk when it comes to the funding disparity between low income or very low income and everybody else. It's federal programs. It's largely Title I, because you have targeted assistance or you have whole site assistance, and there's a difference in the amount of money, and that's why you see that chart going down, by the way, right before it goes way up, because when you get a whole site and with one campus getting full federal funding, the maximum amount of Title I dollars, it's surprise, a lot more than targeted assistance. And so, that the choice to omit that is not obviously,
it's indefensible. And the other methodological difference, and I think reasonable people can actually quibble over this. The other difference is that other analysis that suggests that the districts with the poorest students have less money is that they, unlike Brookings, will do a cost of living adjustment. Now, I don't think that it's totally unreasonable to have the cost of living adjustment, right? I mean, if you're in San Francisco, it is more expensive to hire teachers. Your capital costs are probably higher, but that's not perfectly correlated, right? Paper probably costs the same what it does in Oklahoma, or it's similar. So that cost of living adjustment is also not perfectly reflective of the way that costs change. So I don't necessarily know what the right answer is there. Maybe you present both, and
I would say both, because that actually is interesting information to have and to know, but it's not the whole picture. And I think it would be a bigger mistake to not present the absolute dollars than to not present the cost of living adjustment. So I would just say, in that instance, as in a lot of instances, more data is better. Just show us what is it that's going on. So
yeah, I agree with you. But anyway, in a nutshell, I'm thankful for Brookings doing good, honest work here. And, Jason, as you were saying, it actually does potentially help change the paradigm a little bit. Now that there's sources that people on the left treat as credible, echoing the things that we already know to be true, that's helpful.
Yeah.
Yes.
Agreed. Okay. Well, thank you. That was a good dessert. And thanks, Jason, for a solid main course. And can't forget Jimothy. So we made it all the way from Jimothy to funding disparities. I think that's good. That's a good, solid lunch. So thanks for everyone joining us. We appreciate it, and have a great Wednesday.
All right. See you all next week.
Take care.